Hi guys, we're going to continue reading Dealing with Dragons. We're on to chapter 6, in which the wizards do some snooping and Cimorene snoops back. For the next 3 weeks, Cimorene spent most of her free time studying the fireproofing spell and collecting the ingredients she would need to cast it. A few, like wolfsbane and feverfew, she could gather from the herbs that grew on the slopes of the mountains. Alianora had found a little jar of hippopotamus oil among the cosmetics left by her predecessor. The unicorn water Cimorene got from Morwen after promising her a copy of the spell if it worked. She went to Kazul about the white eagle's feathers, though she was a little afraid to explain what she wanted them for. She didn't want Kazul to think she was worried about Kazul losing her temper and accidentally roasting her. Fortunately, the dragon found the whole idea very interesting. "Could be very useful," Kazul said reflectively. "There are enough hot-tempered youngsters around that it would be well worth fireproofing the princesses who have to deal with them." "I'm not sure I'll be able to fireproof anyone at all," Cimorene said. "I haven't been able to find the white feathers, or the powdered hen's teeth, and nobody seems to have any." "I'll see what I can do," Kazul said, and a few days later she dropped off a bundle of white eagle's feathers at the door of the kitchen. Half of a feather was stuck to one of her right claws, and another was caught between two of her teeth, and she looked very pleased with herself. Cimorene decided not to ask any awkward questions. Even Kazul, however, could not find any hen's teeth, so Cimorene had to keep putting off trying out the spell. When she wasn't working on collecting the ingredients for the fireproofing spell, Cimorene read the Historia Draconem. It was very difficult at first. After all, it had been a long time since her last Latin lesson. She kept working at it until she started to remember the right endings for the declensions and conjugations and cases. Shortly after, she realized she was not having to look up quite as many words as she had at the beginning. From then on, her progress was rapid. It helped that she found the book fascinating. Dragon history was not a subject commonly taught to princesses in Linderwall, but she was a dragon's princess now, and she had personal reasons for being interested. Besides, the history of dragons was very exciting. Every page was full of descriptions of dragons ravaging villages, carrying off princesses, defeating knights and princes, occasionally being defeated by them, and fighting with wizards, giants, and each other. When the book wasn't describing battles, it was describing the famous dragons' hordes and peculiar draconian customs. Cimorene was in the library with the Historia Draconem in front of her and her Latin dictionary on the table beside her left hand, when she heard someone calling from the front of the cave. She had hoped it would be at least a little longer before the night started coming back, so she couldn't help sighing as she stuck a leather bookmark into the book and closed it. Then she went out to argue with whoever it was until they went away. Two wizards were standing just outside the mouth of the cave, and Cimorene saw their wooden staffs first before she was close enough to see their faces. As she came nearer, she recognized the one on the left as Zeminar. The one on the right was taller and younger. His brown hair and beard showed no trace of gray, and his blue and brown robes were identical to the older wizard, except for the colors. His eyes were the same bright black as his companion's, and he looked at Cimorene in a way that made her feel uneasy. "Good morning to you, Princess Cimorene," Zeminar said. "I thought I would take you up on your kind offer of an invitation to visit. We haven't come at an inconvenient time, have we?" "Not at all," Cimorene said, thinking hard. She had promised Kazul that she would try to find out what Zeminar was after if he showed up, and here he was. Maybe if she convinced him that she was as silly as her sisters, he would be careless and let something slip. "I thought perhaps we might have since it took you so long to come out," Zeminar said mildly, but Cimorene thought there was a hint of suspicion in his eyes. "I must not have heard you right away," Cimorene said, batting her eyes innocently, the way her next to youngest sister did when she had done something particularly foolish. "Kazul has quite a large set of caves, and I was in one of the ones at the back. I'm so sorry." "Ah!" Zeminar stroked his beard with his left hand. "That would make it difficult for you. Perhaps we could set up a spell for you, one that would let you know whenever anyone comes to visit. It would be pleasant for more visitors, too, wouldn't it? If they didn't have to shout. What do you think, Aunt Torel?" "Like the one we have at the headquarters of the society," the second wizard said, nodding. "We could do it in 2 or 3 minutes, right from here. It'd be easy." Zeminar shot a dark look at his companion. Cimorene was sure he'd wanted to pretend the spell was difficult so that he would have an excuse to wander around Kazul's caves. Quite so, Zeminar said. Well, princess? Oh dear, I don't know, Cimorene said, doing her best to imitate the way her eldest sister behaved whenever anyone wanted her to decide anything. It sounds very nice, but Kazul is so picky about where things go and how things are done. No, I couldn't. I simply couldn't let you do anything like that without asking Kazul first. What a pity, Zeminar said, and his companion coughed and shuffled his feet. Oh, yes, allow me to present my son, Antero. I hope you don't mind me bringing him along. Of course not, Cimorene said, with forced politeness. I'm pleased to make the acquaintance of such a lovely princess, Antero said, bowing. Cimorene blinked. This wasn't getting anywhere. Maybe if she brought them inside, they'd relax a little. Thank you, she said to Aunt Won't you come in and have some tea? We would be delighted, Zeminar said quickly, if you'll lead the way, princess. This way, Cimorene said, and she stopped just inside the mouth of the cave and gave the wizards her sweetest, most innocent smile. You can leave your staffs right here. Just lean them up against the wall. Aunt looked considerably startled, and Zeminar frowned. Is this, too, something your dragon requires? He said. I don't know, Cimorene said, wrinkling up her forehead the way her third from eldest sister did whenever she was puzzled, which was often. But they'll be so awkward in the kitchen. Don't you think? There's not much room. We'll manage, Zeminar said. Cimorene really hadn't expected the wizards to let go of their staffs, but it had been worth a try. She shrugged off and smiled and led them into the kitchen, where she made a point of bumping into the staffs and tripping over them every time she went by. Finally, Aunt turned his sideways and tucked it under the table. Zeminar hung on to his with a kind of grim, suspicious stubbornness that made Cimorene wonder whether she was fooling him at all with her pretend silliness. The wizards made uncomfortable conversation about the weather and the size of the kitchen for several minutes while Cimorene fixed the tea and poured it. Are the rest of Kazul's caves this large? Zeminar asked Cimorene as she handed him his teacup. She had given him one with a broken handle, even though he was a guest, because she didn't trust him. Oh, yes, Cimorene said. She was beginning to think she was never going to find out anything. These two wizards seemed perfectly happy to sit at the kitchen table and talk about nothing whatsoever. Remarkable, Aunt said in an admiring tone. You know, we wizards don't often get to see the inside of a dragon's cave. I'll bet you don't, Cimorene thought as she gave him a puzzled smile. That's too bad, she said out loud. Yes, it is, Zeminar said. Perhaps you'd be willing to show us around. Cimorene thought very rapidly. It was obvious that she wasn't going to learn anything if the wizards just sat at the kitchen table and drank tea, so she decided to take a chance. Well, she said in a doubtful tone, I suppose it'll be all right as long as I don't take you into the treasure rooms. That's fine, Aunt said a little too quickly. You won't touch anything, will you? Cimorene asked as they stood up. Kazul is so particular about where things are kept. Of course not, Zeminar said, smiling insincerely. Cimorene smiled back and led the way out into the hall. She watched the wizards carefully as she took them through the large main cave, the general storage caverns, the big cavern where Kazul visited with other dragons. Zeminar made polite noises about the size and comfort of everything, but neither he nor Antrell seemed to be very interested. And this is the library, Cimorene said, throwing the door open. I'm impressed, Zeminar said, and Cimorene could tell that this time he meant it. She stepped in sideways so that she could keep an eye on both of the wizards at the same time. A remarkable collection, Antrell commented. He began walking around the room, admiring the bookshelves and scanning their titles. What's this? Zeminar said, bending over the table. The Historia Draconim? A surprising choice for light reading, princess. His eyes met Cimorene's, and they were hard and bright and suspicious. Oh, I'm not reading it, Cimorene said hastily, opening her eyes very wide. I just thought it would make the library look nicer to have a book or two sitting out on the table. More lived in. Zeminar nodded, looking relieved and faintly contemptuous. I think it works very well, princess, he said. Very well indeed. He looked over to the other side of the room and said sharply, Antrell, what are you doing? Cimorene turned her head in time to see Aunt Rel put a hand out and very deliberately tip several books off the shelves. "Stop that!" she said, forgetting to sound silly. "I'm very sorry, Princess," Aunt Rel said. "Will it take you long to help me put them back where they belong?" Cimorene had no choice but to go over and help, and it took several minutes to get everything back in place because Aunt Rel kept dropping things. Cimorene got quite annoyed with him and finally did it all herself, and as she started to turn back to the center of the room, she caught a glimpse of Zeminar hastily closing the Historia Draconum. Cimorene pretended not to notice, but she made a mental note that he had been looking at something near the middle of the book. "That was dreadfully careless of you," Cimorene said, frowning at Aunt Rel. "Very clumsy," Zeminar agreed. "I don't know what Kazul will say when she finds out about it," Cimorene went on. "Really, it is too bad of you. I did ask you not to touch anything, you know." "Yes, you did," Zeminar said. "I wouldn't like to think we'd gotten you in trouble. Perhaps it would be best if you didn't mention to Kazul that we were here at all." "I suppose I could do that," Cimorene said in a doubtful tone. "Of course you can," Aunt Rel said encouragingly. "I'll come back in a few days to make sure everything's all right." "I think it's time we were on our way," Zeminar said, giving his son a dark look. "Thank you for showing us around, Princess." Cimorene escorted them out of the cave and made sure they had left, and then hurried back to the library. She spent the next several hours poring over the middle parts of the Historia Draconum, trying to figure out what Zeminar had been looking at. She was still there when Kazul arrived home. "That wizard Zeminar finally came, and he brought his son along with him," Cimorene said as she came out of the library. "I know," said Kazul, and her voice sounded a little thick, as if she had a cold. "I could smell them the minute I came in." "Why, is that why you sound odd?" Cimorene said. "You're trying not to sneeze, are you?" "I don't think so," Kazul replied. "Don't worry about it. I'll have plenty of time to turn my head away." "I wish I could get a hold of some hen's teeth," Cimorene said, frowning. "That fireproofing spell." "Have you looked in the treasure rooms?" Kazul asked. "No," Cimorene replied, startled. Though she remembered seeing a number of jars and bottles of various shapes and sizes when she had been organizing the treasure, none of them had been labeled. "I didn't think of it. And besides, it's your treasure." "You're my princess. At least until someone rescues you or I decide otherwise," Kazul pointed out. "Go ahead and look, and if you find any hen's teeth, use them. Be careful when you're checking the jars, though. There are one or two with lead stoppers that shouldn't be opened." "Lead stoppers," Cimorene said. "I'll remember." "Good. Now what did those wizards want?" "I'm not sure." Cimorene explained everything that had happened, including how she had seen Zeminar closing the history book as she turned, and how the two wizards had been perfectly willing to leave right after that. "But just before they disappeared, Antrel said he might come back another time," Cimorene concluded. "So I don't know whether they found what they were looking for or not." "Do you know which part of the Historia Draconum Zeminar was reading?" Kazul asked. "Somewhere in the middle, a little past my bookmark. I was just looking at it when you came in. It's the part about how the dragons came to the Mountains of Mourning and settled into the caves and chose a king." "That's the section where the Historia describes the caves of fire and night, right?" Kazul said. Cimorene nodded. "There was a whole page about someone finding a stone in the cave so that the dragons could pick a king. It didn't make much sense to me." "Colin's stone," Kazul said, nodding. "We've used it to choose our king ever since the first time. When a king dies, all of the dragons go into the Ford of Whispering Snakes in the Enchanted Forest and take turns trying to move Colin's stone from there to the Vanishing Mountain. The one that succeeds is the next king." "What if there were two dragons strong enough to move it?" Cimorene asked curiously. "It's not a matter of strength," Kazul said. "Colin's stone isn't much larger than you are. Even a small dragon could carry that much weight twice around the Enchanted Forest without any trouble at all. But Colin's stone has an aura, a kind of vibration. When you carry it you can feel it humming along your claws, and the humming gets stronger the farther away you go until your bones are shaking. Most dragons have to drop it or they'll be shaken to pieces. But there's always one who is suited to the stone, and for that dragon the stone's humming is just a pleasant buzz. So of course it's easy to get it to the Vanishing Mountain." "You sound as if you've had experience," Cimorene said. "Of course. Kazul responded matter-of-factly. "I was old enough to participate in the task the last time the king died," she smiled reminiscently. "I got farther than anyone expected me to, though I wasn't one of the top 10 by any means." Cimorene tilted her head to one side, considering. "I think I'm glad you didn't win." "Oh, why is that?" Kazul said, sounding amused. "Because you wouldn't have had any use for a princess if you were the queen of the dragons. And if you hadn't decided to take me on, that yellow-green dragon Moran's probably would have eaten me," Cimorene explained. "You mean if I were the king of dragons," Kazul corrected her. "The queen of dragons is a dull job." "But you're female," Cimorene said. "If you'd carried Colin's stone from the Fort of Whispering Snakes to the Vanishing Mountain, you would have been a queen, would you not?" "No, of course not," Kazul said. "The Queen of Dragons is a totally different job from King, and it's not one I'm particularly interested in. Most people aren't. I think the position's been vacant since Auron tore his wing and had to retire." "But King Tokaz is a male dragon." Cimorene frowned. "Isn't he?" "Yes, yes, but it has nothing to do with it," Kazul said a little testily. "King is a name of the job. It doesn't matter who holds it." Cimorene stopped and thought for a moment. "You mean the dragons don't care whether their kings are male or female, and the title's the same no matter who the ruler is?" "That's right. We like to keep things simple." "Oh." Cimorene decided to return to the original topic of conversation before the dragon's simple ideas confused her further. "Why would a wizard be interested in Colin's stone if it's only used for picking out the king of dragons?" "I doubt they are," Kazul replied. "However, Colin's stone was found in the caves of Night and Fire, and the wizards have always been interested in the caves. But the dragons control most of them, and all the easy entrances are ours, so the wizards have never been let inside, much less find out what the stone looks like. The Historia Draconum is one of the few books that talks about the caves at all, and there aren't many copies. I'll wager Zeminar would have stolen it outright if he thought he could get away with it." "I thought the dragons let wizards into the caves of Fire and Night," Cimorene objected. "Why would Zeminar be poking through history books looking for information if he can just go and look at them whenever he wants to?" "We don't let the wizards visit the caves whenever they want," Kazul said. "If we did, they'd be running in and out all the time, and nobody would be able to breathe without sneezing. No, they're limited to certain days and times, and if they want to visit the caves of Fire and Night otherwise, they have to use one of the entrances we don't control, and few of them try. The other ways of getting into the caves are very dangerous, even for wizards." "Well, maybe they're looking for an easier way in." Cimorene did not seem to be paying much attention. She thought for a moment and then turned toward the Cave of the Mouth. "I'm going to see Garium. Roxham said a book had been stolen from her library, and I want to know which one. I'll be back in a few hours." "I think I'll go look at the Historia Draconum more while you're gone," Cimorene said thoughtfully. "If there is something useful about the Caves of Fire and Night, maybe I can find it now that I know what I'm looking for." Cimorene spent the rest of the afternoon carefully translating the chapter that talked about the caves. She was a little disappointed to find out that there was very little about the caves themselves, though what there was interesting. The book told about how the dragons had discovered the caves way back and described some of the things they had found in them. Caverns full of blue and green fire, pools of black liquid that would cast clouds of darkness for 20 miles if you poured 3 drops onto the ground, walls made of crystal that multiplied every sound by 1,000-fold, rocks that spurted fire when they were broken. Most of the rest of the chapter was about Colin's stone, and how it was taken out of the caves by the first king of dragons. Kazul returned just before dinner, and when she did, she and Cimorene compared notes. Cimorene told Kazul that she had learned what she had learned from the chapter on the caves of Fire and Night, and Kazul explained what she had learned from Garium. The stolen book was of the king of the dragons, and the entire first section was about Colin's stone in the caves of Fire and Night, Kazul said. And only a wizard could have gotten past the spells and safeguards that Garium puts on her library. I think that settles it. The wizards are definitely collecting information about the caves of Fire and Night." Then why do they keep looking at books of dragon history? It seems like a roundabout way of finding whatever it is they want to know. There isn't any other way to do it, Kazul said. Nobody but dragons has ever had much to do with the caves, and no one has written much about them except in dragon histories. Even the wizards weren't particularly interested in them until a few years ago, except as a reliable route into the enchanted forest. But from what I've been reading about the Historia Draconum, the caves sound fascinating, Cimorene said. You mean that no one has ever written anything about the caves in Fire and Night except dragons? That's... Kazul stopped suddenly and her eyes narrowed. No, that's not right. There was a rather rumpled scholar who talked his way into the caves a century back or so, and after he left he wrote an extremely dry book about what he found there. I'd forgotten about him. Do you have a copy? Cimorene asked hopefully. No, Kazul said, but I don't think the Society of Wizards does either. There weren't very many of them printed, and a lot of those were lost in a flood a few years later. Some hero or another shoved a giant into a lake to drown him. The silly clunch didn't realize that if he put something that big into the lake, the water would have to go somewhere. Well, that doesn't do us much good, Cimorene said. It's nice that the Society of Wizards doesn't have a copy of that book, but if we can't get a hold of one either... I didn't say that, Kazul said. I don't have a copy myself, but I know who does. Who? Cimorene asked impatiently. Morwen. I'm afraid you're not going to be able to work on that fireproofing spell of yours tomorrow. We're taking a trip into the enchanted forest instead. And that is the end of chapter 6. Next time we'll pick up with chapter 7, in which Cimorene and Kazul make a journey underground. I hope you guys are enjoying this as much as I am. Until I see you next time, stay happy and stay safe. Goodbye!